The HOA tried to destroy my homestead. Now their president is gone, and I'm the one rewriting the rules. They fined me for chickens, called my solar panels a hazard, and used police, lawyers, and lies to try to force me out. But I lawyered up, documented everything, and uncovered how the president had been stealing HOA funds for personal use. We went to court and won. She was removed, the HOA was reformed, and my farm is thriving. Now the neighbors wave as they pass, and I finally have peace on my land, my way. I'd been dreaming about getting away from the constant noise and rush of the city for as long as I could remember. After grinding for years, scraping every dollar I could save, I finally made it happen. I bought this little piece of heaven just beyond the edge of a growing suburban sprawl, a peaceful 3-acre plot tucked beside a quiet creek, surrounded by thick greenery that muffled the chaos I'd left behind. It wasn't some massive estate, but it was all I needed. My vision was simple: a small self-sustaining farm with a greenhouse, a flock of chickens, and solar panels to help me cut the cord from the grid. The old guy who sold me the land had lived there for decades and swore up and down that it wasn't tied to the neighborhood's homeowners association. He even walked me through the zoning paperwork to prove it. Different rules, different classifications, no HOA nonsense. That was a huge part of what sold me. I wanted to live my life without having to ask for permission every time I planted a tomato or put up a chicken wire fence. I didn't need some suburban committee telling me what color my mailbox had to be. The first couple of weeks out there were honestly the best I'd felt in years. Every morning, I was up early, boots on, clearing overgrown weeds, setting posts for the chicken fence, sketching out how I wanted to lay out the greenhouse. It was quiet, peaceful, the kind of quiet that seeps into your bones and makes you feel human again. The neighbors kept to themselves, tucked away behind their picture-perfect lawns and hedges. Occasionally, I'd notice a car slowed down as it passed, maybe a curious glance or two from behind a windshield, but I didn't think much of it. I figured they were just trying to figure out what the new guy was doing. To me, that land was a fresh start, a place where I could breathe. I didn't realize then that the calm wouldn't last. One Friday afternoon, I pulled into my driveway with a bag of feed in the back seat and a smile on my face, still buzzing from the progress I'd made around the farm that week. But that good mood evaporated the second I saw the white envelope sticking out of my mailbox. It was crisp and clean, with a blue and gold logo stamped right on the front, fancy and official looking. I recognized it immediately from the sign posted near the entrance of the neighborhood. The Homeowners Association. That was strange. I hadn't signed anything with them, wasn't part of their community, and made sure of that before I ever bought the place. Curious, but not exactly worried, I opened the envelope and read through the letter inside. It was filled with stiff legal language, clearly meant to intimidate, and laid out a list of supposed violations on my property. They accused me of keeping unauthorized livestock. My chickens, said the solar panels were unsightly and visible from the road, and claimed I hadn't maintained the landscaping to match the aesthetic of the community. Then came the kicker. They were demanding that I take down the panels, get rid of the chickens, and replant grass over my cleared farm space within 2 weeks, or they'd start slapping me with a $100 fine every single day. I actually laughed out loud when I finished reading it. There had to be some mistake. I wasn't in their jurisdiction. My land was completely separate, zoned differently, no association ties, no obligations to follow their rules. I crumpled up the letter, tossed it on the kitchen table, poured myself a strong cup of coffee, and shrugged it off. As far as I was concerned, this was someone trying to flex authority they didn't have. But less than a week later, another letter arrived. This one worded more aggressively, hinting at legal action if I didn't fall in line. That's when it stopped being funny. Now I was annoyed. I decided to call them directly and straighten things out. A woman answered the phone, introduced herself as Cheryl Walters, president of the Homeowners Association, and launched into her speech without so much as a hello. "Mr. Walker," she snapped, already lecturing me. "We've received numerous complaints from residents regarding your property. You're in direct violation of community guidelines, and we expect these matters to be addressed promptly." I kept my voice calm, even though I was starting to boil. "Ma'am, I think there's been some confusion. My property isn't part of your HOA. I reviewed the deed, the zoning documents, everything. It's all independent." Her tone shifted from sharp to downright patronizing. "Every property in this neighborhood falls under our governance, Mr. Walker. I suggest you take another look at your paperwork." "I already did," I said, my voice firm now. "And I'm not mistaken. You don't have any authority over my land." She paused for a second, clearly not expecting pushback, then added coldly, "Regardless of what you believe, we'll be pursuing action if the violations continue." Then she hung up on me. I sat there holding the phone, heart pounding with frustration, realizing I just stepped into something a whole lot bigger than I thought. Whatever this was, it wasn't just a simple misunderstanding. It was the opening shot of a fight I never asked for, but one I wasn't going to run from. The following week, things started to snowball. Another letter landed in my mailbox, more aggressive, more threatening, practically barking orders and legal jargon. It was clear now that Cheryl and her HOA buddies weren't just sending warnings. They were trying to wear me down. Every letter talked about violations, expectations, consequences. Always the same nonsense about the chickens, the solar panels, the landscaping not fitting their community aesthetic. I had no doubt anymore. This wasn't some clerical error or misunderstanding. They were targeting me. I thought maybe, just maybe, a second phone call could help put an end to it. Maybe if I laid it out clearly again, this time with a firmer tone, they'd back off. So I called the HOA office and, like clockwork, got Cheryl on the line. She didn't sound surprised to hear from me. In fact, it was like she was expecting my call. "Mr. Walker," she said, "all business. Since we last spoke, we've had even more complaints about your property. It's become a distraction. The community is concerned." I didn't bother pretending to be polite this time. "Cheryl, let's cut the theater. I've checked and rechecked every legal document I have. My property is outside of your HOA. It's zoned agricultural, not residential. I have every right to do exactly what I'm doing." She didn't flinch. "I'm afraid you're mistaken. These documents can be complex. Perhaps you missed something. But we intend to move forward with enforcement if the situation isn't corrected." I wanted to scream. Instead, I clenched my jaw and said, "You can move forward with whatever you want, but you won't win. This land is mine, and you have no legal authority over it." There was a long pause before she ended the call with the kind of icy finality that told me she was already making plans for her next move. And sure enough, those moves came quickly. Over the next several days, I noticed a shift in the neighborhood. Cars would slow down as they passed my fence line, drivers craning their necks to get a better look at what the troublemaker was up to. Some folks walked by in pairs, whispering under their breath, throwing glances that made it clear I'd become the subject of backyard gossip and front porch judgments. One evening, I came home to find a handwritten note taped to my front gate. It accused me of bringing down property values and demanded that I respect the community. No name, of course, just righteous, anonymous scolding. And then things got more serious. A couple weeks later, a police cruiser pulled into my driveway. A young officer stepped out with a clipboard in hand and an awkward look on his face. "Afternoon, sir. We got a noise complaint from the local homeowners association. Said there's been some loud animal activity chickens, they think. You mind if I take a look around?" I held back a sigh and nodded, keeping my voice steady. "Sure, officer. I've got nothing to hide. My land's zoned for this. I've got all the permits you'll need to see." He seemed skeptical at first, but polite. I walked him around the property, showed him the coop, the solar setup, even the little garden patch I just started. He asked a few questions, jotted some notes, then gave me a half smile and said, "Looks like everything checks out. I'll log it as clear. Just so you know, though, we're required to follow up on every complaint, even if they turn out to be baseless." I nodded and thanked him, but deep down, I was rattled. This wasn't going to stop. Cheryl and the HOA had no authority, but that wasn't stopping them from using every trick they could find to shake me up. I could feel it in my bones now. This wasn't just about chickens or grass. This was personal. It didn't take long before the visits from the cops turned into a regular thing. First, it was the noise complaint. Then, a week later, it was some vague call about suspicious activity. Not long after that, another officer showed up saying my chickens had supposedly wandered into the neighborhood and torn up someone's lawn. Every single time, I'd walk them to the property, show them the permits, the fences, the coop, everything. And every single time, they left without issuing so much as a warning. It was becoming obvious that the police didn't actually believe any of it. They were just ticking boxes, responding to a steady stream of complaints from the HOA. One officer even muttered under his breath, "This feels like a setup," as he signed off on his report. I wasn't just annoyed anymore, I was exhausted. And it wasn't just the visits. The vibe in the neighborhood shifted hard. I could feel it. People slowed their cars down even more. sometimes stopping just long enough to snap photos. Trash started appearing at the edge of my property, like someone was trying to frame me for dumping. My mailbox got stuffed with HOA flyers even though I'd told Cheryl's office I wasn't a member. And the worst of it was when I found the side of my chicken coop spray painted with the word eyesore in big, angry red letters. That one hit different. That one made it feel real. I wanted to believe I was just being paranoid, that maybe it was a prank or some kid being stupid. But deep down, I knew. This wasn't random. Someone, or several someones, wanted to drive me out. So I did what I should have done earlier. I put up security cameras. 4 of them, covering every angle of the property. I didn't want to feel like I was living in a fortress, but I needed proof. If they were going to play dirty, I needed to start playing smart. And the cameras worked. Within days, they caught footage of teens sneaking onto my land in the middle of the night. They weren't just being mischievous. They knocked over my feed bins, scattered grain everywhere, and bolted. I sent the footage to the cops and filed a report, but unless I could ID who sent them, their hands were tied. Still, it was something. The footage proved this wasn't in my head. Meanwhile, the HOA wasn't slowing down. They kept firing off complaint after complaint: noise, smell, improper use of land, public safety risks. At one point, I came home from the hardware store to find another cruiser in my driveway. The officer told me Cheryl had claimed my solar panels were a fire hazard, poorly installed and dangerous. I couldn't believe it. I'd had those panels put in by licensed professionals, inspected, signed off, everything by the book. So I handed over the paperwork again, including the safety certifications. The officer looked through them, nodded slowly, and said, "Honestly, this is starting to look like targeted harassment. But we've got to respond to every report." My advice? Keep documenting everything. If this continues, you might want to file something yourself. That advice stuck with me. I wasn't just dealing with a busybody HOA anymore. This was a coordinated campaign, and if I didn't push back the right way, it was never going to stop. At that point, I knew I couldn't just ride this out and hope it fizzled. It was clear Cheryl and her HOA crew were committed to making my life miserable, and if I didn't start fighting smarter, they might eventually wear me down. So I reached out to someone who could help me go on the offensive, a lawyer named Rachel Kim. A no-nonsense type with a sharp mind and a sharper tongue, Rachel specialized in property disputes, and the moment I laid out everything, letters, police visits, spray-painted insults, bogus complaints, she didn't even hesitate. "They have no jurisdiction over your land," she said flatly, flipping through the documents I'd scanned for her. "But they're playing the long game. They're trying to frustrate you into compliance or, better yet for them, drive you out." That sounded about right. So, on her advice, I started keeping records of everything. Every letter, every police visit, every voicemail from Cheryl, every HOA flyer shoved into my mailbox. I saved security footage, took screenshots of emails, kept a physical log of every complaint and every response. It felt obsessive, sure, but necessary, because something told me this was going to get worse before it got better. And I was right. One morning, I noticed an SUV parked across the street, engine running, a man in a suit sitting behind the wheel with a camera pointed straight at my land. I didn't go out and confront him. I just pulled out my phone, took some pictures of him doing his thing, and added it to the growing pile of evidence. Later that day, another envelope showed up in my mailbox, only this time, it wasn't from the HOA. This one came from a law firm I'd never heard of. The contents? A formal notice of violation listing half a dozen supposed issues with my property. Same stuff as before. Chickens, solar panels, land use, aesthetics. But now it came with a shiny new threat: legal action if I didn't rectify the violations within 10 days. The photos attached to the notice were the same ones the guy in the SUV had taken that morning. That was the moment the whole thing shifted. I wasn't just dealing with nasty letters or passive-aggressive neighbors anymore. Now they'd hired outside muscle. I called Rachel immediately and forwarded the letter to her. She read it in real time over the phone and let out a low whistle. "They've officially overstepped," she said. "This isn't just harassment anymore. This is actionable." "So what's the move?" I asked. "We hit back," she said, without missing a beat. "I'll start drafting a lawsuit, harassment, defamation, and abuse of legal process. But first, I'm going to subpoena their financial records. If they're using HOA funds to pay this law firm, and you're not a member, that's misappropriation." That was music to my ears. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I wasn't just defending myself, I was getting ready to fight back. Meanwhile, Rachel encouraged me to keep telling my side of the story, and I figured she was right. I logged into a local community forum, posted a detailed account of everything that had happened, and within hours, the comments started pouring in. Sympathy, support, even a few confessions. Other folks had their own run-ins with Cheryl's HOA. Some had given up. Others were still afraid to speak. But the tide was turning. I could feel it. And so could they. With Rachel working the legal side and the community forum lighting up with comments, it felt like the wind was finally starting to shift. People were beginning to realize this wasn't just about a guy with a few chickens and solar panels. It was about power, overreach, and control. The more I shared, the more folks started speaking up. Some dropped anonymous stories about how they'd been fined for the color of their front door or threatened for planting the wrong kind of flowers. The HOA had built its kingdom on fear and silence, and now that silence was cracking. A few days later, I got a message from a local journalist named Kevin who had seen my post and wanted to do a story. Normally, I'd have avoided that kind of attention, but this time I agreed. If there was ever a moment to put it all out in the open, this was it. Kevin showed up with a notepad and a mic, asked thoughtful questions, and seemed genuinely disturbed by everything I told him. He even interviewed Rachel and got a few other neighbors to speak off the record. The article came out the following week under the headline, "When the HOA Goes Too Far, One Man's Fight Against Neighborhood Tyranny." It hit like a spark in dry grass. Local news picked it up. More people reached out to share their own stories, and suddenly I wasn't just a weird farmer guy on the outskirts. I was the guy who stood up. With the momentum building, I decided to do something bold. I put out an open invite to the entire neighborhood, an open house at my property. No agenda, no speeches, just a chance for people to come see for themselves what Cheryl and the HOA had been demonizing. I set up folding chairs, walked people through the garden beds, showed off the greenhouse, the panels, the coop. I even put out lemonade and fresh-baked cookies from a neighbor who offered to help. I wasn't sure who would actually show up, but by noon, cars were lined up down the road. Dozens of people came, young couples, older folks, even a few kids. Some were clearly skeptical, arms crossed, scanning the place for reasons to be upset. But as they walked around, something shifted. They saw it wasn't some trashy operation or chaotic mess. It was just a small, peaceful homestead built with care. And then came the moment I didn't expect. A local politician, someone who had been vocal about reigning in HOA authority, showed up and gave a short, impromptu speech right there by the chicken coop. "This," he said, waving his hand at the garden, "is exactly what we should be supporting. Neighbors minding their own business, living responsibly, and contributing to the community without being harassed." The crowd clapped. I stood there, trying not to tear up. After months of feeling like I was under siege, here I was, supported, seen, even celebrated. Cheryl and her crew had painted me as a problem, but now people were realizing I might be part of the solution. Meanwhile, Rachel's investigation into the HOA's finances had started turning up gold. She discovered that Cheryl had been using HOA funds to pay for the law firm harassing me, which would have been bad enough on its own. But it got worse. Rachel found line items for fancy dinners, luxury travel, and even upgrades to Cheryl's own home, all billed to the HOA account. The second she showed me the documents, I knew this wasn't just going to be a slap on the wrist. We had them, dead to rights. Armed with evidence and now riding a wave of public support, Rachel filed the lawsuit. We named the HOA and Cheryl personally, citing harassment, defamation, and financial misconduct. And just like that, the battle lines were redrawn. No more hiding. No more tiptoeing around. It was time to take them to court. The courthouse felt like a second home by the time the trial finally kicked off. Rachel and I had been preparing for weeks, filing motions, gathering statements, organizing every letter, photo, video, and invoice into a rock-solid case. I walked in wearing a suit that barely felt like mine, but I kept my head high. I wasn't just defending my land anymore. I was standing up for every neighbor who'd ever been pushed around by an HOA that forgot who it was supposed to serve. The courtroom was packed. Neighbors, reporters, even a few people I didn't recognize filled the benches. Cheryl sat at the defendant's table, lips tight, eyes darting. She wasn't her usual smug self anymore. Her lawyer, a stiff guy in a pinstripe suit, kept whispering to her and flipping through folders like he was still trying to figure out how to spin this mess. The opening arguments came and went, and then the testimony started. Rachel was brilliant, cool, direct, and relentless. She walked the judge through every step of what had happened, laying out how the HOA had no jurisdiction, how they'd hired a third-party firm using member funds, and how they'd launched a campaign of harassment against someone they had no authority over. Then came the financials. Page after page of records showing dinners charged to HOA funds, home improvements billed to the organization, travel expenses that had nothing to do with community business. It was all there, black and white, undeniable. One of the HOA board members even flipped. He testified that Cheryl had made decisions without board approval, and that several of them had started questioning her actions months ago but were afraid to speak up. That cracked the case wide open. And then, finally, Cheryl took the stand. It didn't go well. Rachel cross-examined her like a surgeon with a scalpel, slicing through every lie and deflection. Cheryl tried to justify the spending, insisted it was all for the good of the neighborhood, but under pressure, her story kept falling apart. She contradicted herself more than once, and at one point, the judge had to remind her she was under oath. You could see it happening, her credibility crumbling, her lawyer losing confidence, even the jury getting visibly fed up. The whole thing had turned from a legal battle into a public reckoning. When the final arguments were made and the room fell quiet, I wasn't sure what the verdict would be. I believed we'd done everything right, but part of me still worried that maybe, somehow, the system would find a way to look the other way. But when the judge read the decision, it was like a thunderclap. We'd won. The court ruled that the HOA had no jurisdiction over my property, that their actions constituted harassment and defamation, and that Cheryl Walters had misused association funds for personal gain. She was ordered to pay restitution out of her own pocket. The HOA was instructed to undergo immediate leadership reform, and an independent auditor was appointed to oversee their finances going forward. The room burst into quiet applause. A few people stood. Reporters started scribbling. And I just sat there for a second, stunned. After all the sleepless nights, the threats, the fear of losing everything I'd worked for, it was finally over. At least the hardest part. Walking out of that courtroom felt like coming up for air after being held underwater for far too long. The sun was bright, the breeze warm, and for the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. Rachel gave me a proud nod, the kind that said, "Told you so," without saying a word. Reporters swarmed, people clapped me on the back, and someone even shouted, "You did it, man." But all I could think about was getting home to my land, my chickens, my greenhouse, my quiet. The verdict made headlines across the county, and even a few national outlets picked up the story. I got dozens of emails from homeowners around the country, people who had been in similar fights or were still stuck in them. They thanked me for standing up. Some shared their horror stories. A few just said they were rooting for me the whole time. It was overwhelming, but also humbling. I never set out to become a symbol of anything. I just wanted to grow food and be left alone. The settlement money the HOA had to cough up covered every dime of legal expenses and then some. I used part of it to expand the greenhouse, added a few more solar panels, and even picked up a second-hand truck I'd been eyeing for hauling supplies. I also installed better cameras and reinforced a few weak spots on the property. After everything, I wasn't taking chances. But as the days rolled on, the neighborhood began to feel different, lighter, kinder. One afternoon, a sweet older woman named Grace from 3 houses down stopped by with a basket of banana bread and said, "Thank you. What you did, it wasn't just for you. We've all felt trapped for years." I didn't know what to say. I just nodded, shook her hand, and invited her to come by any time. Turns out, there were a lot of people like Grace. Folks who'd quietly resented Cheryl's rule but never felt like they had a voice. Suddenly they were showing up, offering to help with the farm, dropping off eggs or seeds, asking questions about going solar. It felt like a community was blooming around me, something I hadn't expected to grow out of all the conflict. The HOA was overhauled top to bottom. Cheryl resigned before they could vote her out, and a retired schoolteacher named Harold took her place. Harold was calm, thoughtful, and genuinely seemed to care about listening to people. He invited me to attend the next HOA meeting, not as a member, but as a respected neighbor. At first, I didn't want anything to do with it. After what they put me through, stepping into that room felt like walking into enemy territory. But Rachel nudged me. "If you want change to stick," she said, "you've got to be part of the conversation." She was right. The meeting was held in a rec center not far from the neighborhood. Folding chairs, a podium, a pot of coffee that had probably been sitting for hours. But the energy was different. No tension, no fake smiles. Harold opened the meeting by acknowledging the mistakes of the past and promising transparency moving forward. When he called on me to speak, I stood up, took a deep breath, and told them everything. Not with anger, not with revenge in my voice, but with clarity. I talked about the importance of boundaries, respect, and the dangers of unchecked authority. I talked about how we all just want the freedom to live our lives in peace. When I finished, people clapped, not out of obligation, but because they understood. Over the next few months, reforms were rolled out. Clearer guidelines, a better complaint process, a rotating community committee to give everyone a voice. And even though my land still wasn't officially part of the HOA, I was invited back often to weigh in, to offer advice, even to help mediate small disputes between neighbors. It was surreal. The man who had once been the outsider had become someone people trusted. I never asked for that role, but I took it seriously. Back home, life slowly returned to what I'd originally wanted: quiet mornings with my coffee, hands in the dirt, chickens clucking softly as they wandered around. Kids from the neighborhood now rode their bikes past the fence and waved. Some even helped plant herbs in the greenhouse. I looked around one afternoon, the sun low and golden across the land, and felt something I hadn't in a long time: contentment. The battle had been long and messy, but it carved out something beautiful. I didn't just protect my home, I helped change a community. And now, finally, I was living the life I had imagined from the start.